myth number 1. You can set off an ammo rack explosion by ramming. So before I'm going to show you guys any of the test results, I first have to say that it is realistically very unlikely for an ammo rack explosion to happen as a result of a ram, since in order to blow up ammunition, aka gunpowder, you do need some kind of fire, spark or extreme temperature in order to do so. But on the other hand, damaging an ammo rack is really possible in a real life scenario, because the impact can knock shells out of their storage units. But nevertheless, if Wargaming wants to be realistic with this myth, then there should be no way for a ram to set off an ammo rack explosion. But of course, we want to know this for sure, because you never know with Wargaming of course, since they have always seemed to surprise me with the test results of previous Mythbusters as well. But anyways, to kick today's episode off, this myth is at least very nice and simple to test. So this is basically how this test works. In the testing scenario, we have 2 E50Ms for performing the rams of course, and 1 Gorilla 15 to damage the ammo racks beforehand. And on the other team we have a decent amount of T28 prototypes with their very well known easy to ammo rack turrets. So with the test setup complete, we went out to the map Al Haluf, simply because of its relatively steep slope downwards, which is perfect for the E50Ms to catch some speed while charging down towards the T28 prototypes. And then we started putting shots into the back of the T28's turrets, and as expected it didn't take too long for an ammo rack to get damaged. So here we have our first contender of today. As you can see through my eagle eye perk, this T28 is definitely ammo racked. So I drive my E50M all the way up the slope, the path gets cleared, I charge down full speed and boom! What a hit! 709 ramming damage. But sadly we didn't see any ammo rack explosion. So we tried it the second time on stream, this time with my viewer Vermas performing the ram, but again no success either. And to make the recording stream less boring, I decided to call it quits for this myth with those 2 rams. But I continued testing this out off stream on a smaller scale, but again out of the 13 in total performed rams, I didn't manage to explode any of the ammo racks. So conclusion, finally World of Tanks has some realistic outcome of a myth, because as showed on the footage, it is indeed impossible to set off an ammo rack explosion with just a ram, which proves that just in real life you do need some form of a spark or fire to set off the explosion, just like in real life. So therefore it's pretty safe to say that this myth is busted. Myth number 2. If the extra weight of a tank that's on top of you doesn't exceed your load limit, you won't receive any damage from it. So as difficult as this might sound, this myth actually is also rather easy to test. But you still might be a little bit confused about how this myth actually works, so allow me to further explain the myth with an in-game example. So I think that everyone knows that if a tank is on top of another tank, they both will get a steady flow of damage to their vehicle. But imagine yourself this. You have a E100 which weighs about 130 tons in its stock form, but the E100 tracks can carry a maximum of 150 tons, which means that the E100 in its stock loadout has 20 tons of unused loading capacity. So what if we take a very light tank, for example a UE57 which only weighs about 2 tons, and if we were to put that UE on top of the E100, will the E100 still receive damage from the UE being on top of it, since the total weight will increase to 132 tons, which is on paper still way below the 150 tons maximum loading capacity of the E100. That is basically what we're going to test out with this myth. And if we again take a look at what would happen in real life, well, I guess in real life the E100 as well as the UE would instantly become unusable, since the E100's thin roof plate will in no way support a 2-ton tank sitting on top of it. So in real life, I guess both tanks will be destroyed instantly. But what will be the case in World of Tanks? Well, let's find that out. So this myth's testing scenario is very easy. For tanks, it's of course me in the E100 on one team, and a few UE57s and a Rheinmetall Panzerwagen to push the UEs over the wall on the other team. So for the map we decided to go for Paris, since it's pretty easy to get tanks on top of each other on that map. So here we go. I set myself up next to the wall, the UE drives over the wall on top of me, and No! Unfortunately, me as well as the UE still receive damage while on top of each other. So, conclusion. Even though the E100 track should be easily able to support the extra weight, me as well as the UE kept receiving damage just like normal. So, as I already said, a very simple myth with a very simple answer, which is of course that this myth is definitely busted. Myth number 3. Heat ammo will always blow off any tracks in one shot. So this one seemed very interesting to me, since the nature of heat rounds kinda makes it believable for this myth to be true. Since, if you didn't know already, heat works a bit different than AP and APCR shells. Because AP and APCR shells first slice through the enemy's armor and explode afterwards when they are inside of the enemy tank, but heat and also HE explode the moment they impact with the enemy's armor. And because of that instant explosion, this myth suddenly seems very believable. But of course, believing is not enough, so let's actually test it out if that's truly the case or not. So in order to test this myth, I gathered a whole variety of caliber guns that can fire heat rounds, of course, from 170mm calibers all the way down to 75mm calibers. And as targets, I picked the Type 5 Heavy because of the big tracks it has. So for the map we tested it on, it was really nothing special. We just picked, and since it is a small map and we didn't have to drive for that long. So once set up and ready to go, we started shooting with heat from the highest caliber at the Type 5 tracks and worked our way down the calibers from there on. And just as a disclaimer before I'm going to show you the results, we kept shooting at the same track since we wanted to keep it fair, so every tank gets to shoot at a beforehand damaged track. And yeah, the first shot from the Jaegeru is no doubt gonna blow the tracks off. So for that we didn't beforehand damage the track, but anyways, let's get the shooting started. So first off, the Jagdpanzer E100, no surprise, blows the Type 5 tracks straight off. So far so good for this myth. But then moving down to 152mm, the T49 has no trouble taking the tracks off. So then moving down another notch, it's the STB's 105mm gun, and again it takes the tracks off with no problems. Next up is the T54's 100mm gun, and again no problem, takes the tracks straight off. But it was once we moved to the Cruiser 2's 94mm gun where things started to get very close. Because as you can see on the clip, the Cruiser failed to take the Type 5 tracks off with its heat round. And afterwards I tested it again with the AMX 40 75mm gun just to be sure, and just like the Cruiser, it fails to take off the track in one shot. So conclusion, I personally think that the main factor of taking off a track is more focused on the gun's caliber than the ammunition type, since it was clear to see that after a 100mm caliber gun, the effectiveness dropped down massively. But talking about the myth itself, no, heat does not always blow off tracks in one shot no matter the caliber. And with that result, it's very safe to say that this myth is busted. Myth number 4. A fire reduces a tank's camo rating. So yet again, I found this one to be very interesting as well, because in real life it's obviously way easier to spot something when it's on fire, but is that also the case in World of Tanks? Well, let's find out. So to start off with, there are numerous ways you can test this myth, but I went for the side-to-side comparison way, which simply means that you set up two identical tanks with the identical camo value next to each other at the very edge of a tank's maximum spotting range, aka the point where you only have to move a few meters forwards to spot the two targets. And then setting one of the two identical tanks on fire and see if that tank gets spotted while it shooted normally in that situation, if that makes sense. Anyways, everything will come a bit clearer once I show you guys the test footage. So here we go. As a setup, I made it fairly simple with myself driving the Sheridan as a spotter, together with some tank destroyers on my team to, of course, set one of the two identical tanks on fire, with the identical tank on the other team being Object 140, simply because of their vulnerable fuel tanks. So we went now to Malinovka because of the large open field, but then I suddenly realized that I made a little mistake and I put the tank destroyers accidentally on the wrong team. Because I put the TDs on my team, and that means that they could possibly spot for me, which I obviously do not want. So I told the TDs to stand down, and instead I let the Object 140s shoot at their teammates in order to create a fire. So now let's move into the real experiment here. So as you can see, I set myself up in my Sheridan at such a range that I'm very close to, but not quite yet spotting the two Object 140s. So after waiting 10 seconds for me to despot the objects again, I told the other Object 140s to open fire, trying to set one of the two subject tanks on fire. The first batch was without success, but on the second test batch, this happened. So if you look at it at normal speed, it looks like the Object 140 simply got spotted because it turned into a wreck. But after some of the other 140s claimed he did indeed burn for a second, I decided to play the clip again, but this time in slow motion, and take a look at this. So as you can see right here, at this point the Object 140 gets spotted and it is still alive. So the possible scenario for this is that the object only had a little bit more than the roll of the shot worth of hit points left when it got set on fire. So the fire only burned for a split second, and that allows me to spot the Object 140 alive just before the moment it gets destroyed. So conclusion, this was a very hard one to conclude, but the guy who set the Object 140 on fire indeed got the set on fire notification at the bottom of its screen, and since I did indeed spot the Object 140 right before it was about to die from that last fire damage, I can conclude from these results that fire indeed does drop a tank's camo rating. Yeah, finally a myth that actually comes out to be realistic. And of course, this result can only mean one thing, and that is of course that this myth is confirmed. Myth number 5. You can kill a tank without receiving damage points from it. So simply said, according to this myth, it is possible to raise the kill counter by 1 without raising the damage meter. So I thought of two ways of achieving this. Option 1 was by pushing an enemy off a cliff, and option 2 was by pushing a tank underwater. So I decided to test both options live on stream with my viewers. So the tanks picked for this myth didn't really matter, I just happened to pick the Object 430U, and my two test dummies just happened to pick the E50M. Maybe it was a bit smarter to turn that around the other way after all, but hey, it is what it is. Also, for the map we decided to test it on Glacier, because it has a drop high enough to kill a tank and water deep enough to drown a tank. Pretty much the perfect map to test this myth out. So firstly, we tried the cliff option. So the E50M positions himself at the edge of the cliff, while I drive up the slope to gain some speed for the ram. So here we go. I blast off the slope, I knock the E50M off the cliff, and there you go, the E50M dies, but I do get the full damage points from it. So the cliff method seems to be busted, but we still have hope for the drown method. So let's quickly move on to that test. So here we are again on Glacier, with the other E50M standing at the edge of a deep pool of water. So I simply back off a little, and after a little bit of struggling, I finally managed to push the E50M into the water. And I do get some ram damage from it, but that obviously doesn't count. So after a couple seconds, the E50M drowns, and I got the kill for it. Seems to be all good, but this time I did not receive a single point of damage from that E50M kill. So conclusion, pushing a tank off a cliff doesn't seem to be working for this myth, but force drowning an enemy tank seems to be doing the trick. So next time you have the option to either push a tank off the cliff or force drown a tank, I would suggest to go for the cliff push, since in a normal battle situation, I guess most of you won't say no to some extra free damage points to boost up your experience for that battle. But just for the sake of this myth, it is indeed possible to kill a tank without gaining any damage points. So therefore I can safely say that this myth is confirmed. So guys, that was all for today's Mythbusters video. So if you enjoyed the video or found it useful, please consider dropping a like. That will be very much appreciated. Also, if you happen to be new to my channel, then feel free to smash that subscribe button so you will stay up to date with all my future content. And also, if you know any awesome myth that hasn't been tested out yet, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. Or if you want an extra chance for your myth to be seen by me, then hop onto my Discord server and drop your myth into the hashtag WoTMyths channel. Link to join my Discord is in the description. And who knows, you might see your myth pop up in the next episode. But for now, all that's left for me to say is, as always, have an awesome day, and I'll catch you guys later.
Jack it up.